we're going to go way beyond the headlines and take a deep dive into a nation literally at war with itself. We're talking about Myanmar, a country that's fracturing from the inside out. And we're going to piece this story together using some pretty harrowing frontline reporting and evidence that was smuggled out by military defectors. So let's get into it.
This is the last fight for our country's freedom. Just think about those words for a second. They were spoken by a young resistance fighter moments before heading into an attack. And it just cuts right to the heart of this thing, you know? For the thousands of everyday people who've picked up weapons, this isn't some distant political debate. It is everything.
So, to really understand what's happening, you have to see it where it's rawest. And that's on the front lines. We're going to look at one single operation that tells you so much about the courage, the absolute chaos, and the devastating cost of this war.
Okay, so what you're seeing here is based on actual helmet camp footage. It's a group of resistance fighters. And you got to remember, a lot of these guys were students or farmers or had office jobs just a couple of years ago. And here they are launching this incredibly daring attack on a strategic military base. Their goal? To cut off a major supply line for the ruling military, also known as the Junta. It's a huge gamble. And this is the price of that gamble. 20 resistance fighters died in that one operation. That number includes a young man, Deng Ni, who was actually filming himself right at the start of the battle. 20 people. Just gone. And that's just one fight, on one day, in a war that has swallowed an entire country.
So the big question is, how did we even get here? How does a country that seemed to be, slowly moving toward democracy suddenly spiral into this brutal nationwide civil war? To get that, we need to rewind a bit.
The backstory here is really important. After getting independence back in 1948, Myanmar was stuck under military rule for decades. Then, in 2011, this fragile shift towards democracy started. But in February 2021, it all came crashing down. The military, which is called the Tatmadaw, staged a coup, threw the elected leaders in jail, and that was it. That act didn't just kill democracy, it lit a fuse. And the explosion is this massive armed resistance we're seeing today.
Now, the people fighting the junta, it's not one unified army. It's this incredibly diverse coalition. You've got the National Unity Government, or NUG, which is basically a government in exile made up of the politicians who were kicked out. Then you have these ethnic armed organizations, groups that have been fighting for their own autonomy for like forever. And then, and this is key, you have thousands of brand new local militias called People's Defense Forces, or PDFs, just regular folks who decided they had to fight back.
And the fallout for civilians? It's just staggering. Over 3 million people have been forced out of their homes. To put that in perspective, that's more than the entire population of Chicago. Just uprooted, fleeing for their lives with basically nothing. This isn't just a conflict. It is a full-blown humanitarian catastrophe.
Okay, so from the outside, the Myanmar military, the Tatmadaw, it looks like this powerful, invincible machine, right? But if you look closer, inside, a totally different picture emerges. The whole institution is starting to rot from within. It's plagued by defections and a deep, deep sense of paranoia.
Look at this number. At least 15,000 soldiers have either defected or just straight up deserted since the coup started. For the Tatmadaw, that is a massive, unprecedented crisis. We're talking about soldiers who are risking execution to get out because they just can't stand the horrific things they're being ordered to do anymore.
And this just perfectly captures the paranoia that's taken over the military leadership. They have this term, watermelon. Green on the outside, for the uniform, but red on the inside, for the democracy movement. Leaked documents show they're on this desperate witch hunt for these watermelons, blaming them for their losses on the battlefield. They're watching their own troops, their own families. The trust is completely gone.
This right here really shows you the massive gap between the image and the reality. Publicly, the junta shows off its Russian and Chinese fighter jets. But what defectors are telling us, and what documents show, is that because of sanctions and supply problems, they're resorting to dropping these crude homemade bombs out of cargo planes. We're talking about bombs literally made out of PVC pipes. It's a clear sign of a military that's really being stretched to its limits.
And here's a scary truth. A weakening army often becomes a more brutal one. Because they're facing these manpower shortages and a resistance that's growing, the junta is turning to some truly desperate and cruel tactics. So in early 2024, the junta officially started a draft. But what's happening on the ground is basically state-sponsored kidnapping. Young men are literally being snatched from the streets,
given a few months of barely their training, and then thrown into the deadliest battles. And according to soldiers who've defected, these terrified new recruits are often used as human shields, basically cannon fodder to protect the more experienced troops.
This quote is from a soldier who defected. He said, "We have seen torture, we have seen absolute inhumanity that we cannot accept." And that really gets to the core of it. The violence isn't just on the battlefield, it's systematic. It's part of how they operate, especially inside their interrogation centers.
And this leads to one of the most disturbing things to come out of this whole conflict. A defector, a guy named Khoi Lin, managed to secretly film what was going on inside his own military base. And the footage, it shows other soldiers, just regular guys, systematically torturing prisoners to death, beating them with pipes, with cables, with their rifles. It's just undeniable proof of war crimes, happening far away from any front line.
But while the junta's regime seems to be all about terror and collapse, something really interesting is happening in the areas that the resistance has managed to free. They're not just fighting a war, they're actually trying to build a new country from scratch.
Yeah, in places like Karenni State, resistance groups are literally building a parallel government. They're opening schools, running health clinics, they're setting up their own police forces, and, really importantly, they're creating their own courts. This isn't just about winning battles, it's about proving to the people that they can actually govern, that there's a real alternative to military rule.
But this brings up a really tough question. In the middle of all this chaos and fighting, what does justice even look like? It's a huge challenge, and accountability is something that, frankly, applies to everyone involved.
And you can see a really stark difference in how each side deals with these accusations. The military just flat out denies everything. Despite mountains of evidence of torture and targeting civilians, they just say, nope, we follow the rules. On the other side, there have been documented cases of resistance fighters committing abuses too, like executing a soldier who surrendered. The NUG, the government in exile, they acknowledge that this stuff happens, but they say they just don't have the power or the resources to police thousands of separate fighting groups.
All of this leads us to where Myanmar is right now, and it's a really precarious place. This isn't a simple two-sided war. It's a deeply fragmented conflict, and it's pushing the entire country right to the edge of collapse.
I want you to just process this number for a second. There are an estimated 2,600 separate armed resistance groups fighting in Myanmar right now. Think about that. Now, yeah, they all have a common enemy in the Junta, but they are not a single unified army. And that's both their greatest strength, it makes them incredibly hard to wipe out, and a huge potential weakness for the future.
And that brings us to the most terrifying possibility of all. Myanmar is genuinely at risk of becoming a failed state. You have a military that's losing ground but absolutely refuses to give up power, and you have a resistance that's gaining ground but is incredibly fractured. That is not a recipe for a clear victory. It's a recipe for a long, devastating war that could completely shatter the country.
And so that leaves us with this final, haunting question. Even if they win, even if the junta falls tomorrow, what happens next? How do you bring thousands of different armed groups together? How do you even begin to talk about justice and reconciliation after so much brutality? The fight for control of Myanmar might end one day, but the battle to build a lasting peace, that will be a whole different kind of war.
That's the latest from Diversity News. If you found this report insightful, like the video, subscribe right now, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update on the issues that matter.